Hi, and welcome to Digital Disruption Demands Action. 5 questions to ask in the new workforce reality. A one-to-one webinar sponsored by Verint. I'm Tom Hoffman at One-to-One Media, and I'll be the moderator for today's event, where we'll be exploring how the forces of digital disruption, along with the changing work styles of next-generation employees, are requiring companies to become more responsive to the needs of both customers and employees. Our speakers today are Scott Hayes, Vice President of Solutions Marketing at Verint, and Ian Jacobs, Senior Analyst at Forrester Research. Scott and Ian, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Tom.
Before I review the full agenda, I'd like to offer our attendees a few pointers on using the On24 tool. If you should encounter any technical issues during the webinar, please click on the Help button that's located in the center of the toolbar. Also, feel free to tweet about today's webinar using the hashtag that's shown here. So at this point, I'd like to hand things off to Scott Hayes, who will lead us into our rapid-fire dialogue. Scott?
Great. Thanks, Tom, and welcome, everybody. And we're going to start by getting everybody engaged right away with a polling question. And there's lots of choices on this, so you got to read through them and kind of make your decision on what is the top answer for you. Here's the question. Of the following trends, which one presents the biggest challenge for your organization? And you might even need to scroll down. I think we got about 7 or 8 choices there. And we'll give you 30 seconds or so to look through those and pick the one that, of all the things going on, believe me, we understand your space right now. There are a lot of things that are changing, and it might be hard to pick the first one, but take a chance to read through those and then answer. What we're going to do with this poll, actually, is show you the results at the end of this webinar. We've planned a pretty fast pace, 30-minute webinar, and we're going to get through these 5 questions in that time. And so at the end of it, we'll present the results from this poll to the audience. So I'll give you another 5 seconds or so to respond to that, and then we'll move forward. All right, let's get through to the questions. So there are 5 questions that Ian and I are going to answer. And just to let you know how we went through this, we created these questions from research that Ian had developed and published under the Forrester research name, and Ian and I came up with our answers independently. And so there's going to be some interesting kind of overlap and some things that are different from each of our perspectives, Ian from the analyst perspective, me from Verint's vendor perspective. So that's how we're going to go through it. The first question is about the new workforce. What are the characteristics of the new workforce, and why are they reluctant to learn? The second question, how have digital disruptions made it more challenging to provide excellent employee-based service? Question number 3, what should be done with employee-facing applications to enable and empower employees? Question 4, what kinds of information and context need to be integrated and unified to provide better outcomes with less effort? And question 5, about recruiting and training. How can this new reality affect recruiting and training and their impact on performance management? So here it is. We've got 5 questions, 30 minutes. We better get started. All right, question 1, going back to the new workforce. What are the characteristics of the new workforce, and why are they reluctant to learn? Ian, I'm going to turn it over to you to answer this one first.
Thanks, Scott. I feel like I should talk really fast since we only got 30 minutes. But I'm just going to try and cover a lot of information fairly quickly at a normal pace of voice. So what you're seeing up here is a paraphrase of a quote from a guy who runs a contact center with about 5,000 agents in the Philippines. And when I was talking to him about the new breed of agent, he said, yeah, they're really different. They say that they don't want to know anything as long as they know where to find things. Search becomes like their key prism onto the world. So why is that? Well, I think there are 3 things quickly going on. One is this idea is more associated with millennials, and millennials are now the biggest living generation in the United States anyway. It's a little different as you look globally, but certainly in the United States, they are the biggest group, and young people tend to be the pool that you choose your contact center agents from. Another thing is they are raised in the kinds of technologies that actually push information and make search available everywhere, and it's only getting more extreme. I've been wearing an Apple Watch for about a week. I now have Siri able to search wherever I am just with a little click and a voice cue. And then finally, there's this concept of neuroplasticity, which we could do a 3-hour webinar on, but really it's a neuropsychological research that shows that our tools are shaping us, and basically the things that you do use strengthen the neural pathways supporting it. The things you don't use get weakened. So in our new pool of agents, we find that things like ability to search and understanding of how search works is significantly stronger and reinforced. The more they do it, the better they are at it. And I don't mean that necessarily in just a, expertise way. And then their ability to grapple with complex information, since they do less and less of it, actually gets weakened. Inside the brain, there are changes. So that's what I see going on. How about you, Scott?
Right. So I thought this idea of reluctant to learn was an interesting one, and I don't think it's an interesting way to phrase the question. I think it's a reluctance, really, to store things. And I could go way back to when Bill Gates talked about having information at your fingertips. And yes, I do go way back there. I am not a millennial, but I do enjoy, frankly, having the ability to not have to remember something. So I think this does impact your resources and their approach to their work, even if they're not millennials. The deal is, by providing great search and vast amounts of information that is easy to find, you get just-in-time information. I can also get it in context of what's happening right now. And, we provide solutions that do that grab all kinds of context from an interaction that's available to a search application. We provide it under the covers to the search without you even having to type in a keyword. So that becomes a very important lever in making search stronger. But basically, like you said, they would rather search for something than store it. So I really think it's more of a reluctance to retain. I always know I can find it again. I'm not going to spend an ounce of effort on memorizing it or even storing it on my local device. The last one, and we really don't have time to get into this, maybe we'll do it in another webcast, but I do believe with millennials there's a changing work-life balance that does affect their commitment to an organization, their dedication of time to an organization, and that, like I say, could open a whole new can of worms. So we'll save that for another webcast, and we'll move on to question 2. And this one is, how have digital disruptions made it more challenging to provide excellent employee-based service? And I'll start this one, Ian, and then I'll turn it over to you. Digital disruption amongst consumers has given them 3 things. It's given them more ability, more technology, and more choice. So they now have under their thumbs, quite literally, the ability to do something that helps them out that they didn't have before, and they're expecting that ability to serve them well, whether or not they're actually engaging with an employee of the service provider. That's all powered by technology, but it also means that the choice, the choosing another, retailer or site or service to go to is typically just a couple of clicks away. And so it puts a lot of pressure on an organization to serve them well in the channel of their choice, on the device of their choice, so that they remain keeping the supplier as their choice. Now, what's interesting, too, is that the consumers aren't comparing service within an industry. We tend to do that. If I'm in a retail industry or financial services, I might want to compare my level of service to my direct competitors, but consumers don't see it that way. If consumers are getting great service from their financial services provider, then they're going to expect it at a hotel. If they're getting it at a hotel, they're going to expect it, frankly, and we've seen this from their government. And governments are stepping up, too. It might shock you, but I actually had a phenomenal online service experience with the California DMV a couple of days ago. And I expect now that other industries that serve me would have that same level of capability. So let me give it over to you, Ian, and see what your perspective is on digital disruptions.
Thanks, Scott. And actually, I'm shocked that the DMV had a great experience in store for you, but I'm also heartened by that, right? I mean, if we can get the stereotype of the worst type of service imaginable, the thing that's lampooned the most often to provide great service, the world is definitely changing. So if you work for any of the revenue services of federal governments and you're listening, you're next, I hope. Okay, so I'm actually attacking this question from two different perspectives, the digital disruption question. One is that digital has driven much more usage of self-service. Self-service is now available to people wherever they are through mobile devices, and it is now, according to Forrester data, the most used channel in 2014 by consumers when they're trying to get self-service or trying to get service. It actually has this kind of perverse impact, however, because people are going to self-service first, they're going to voice and other agent-assisted channels, not necessarily last, but after self-service has already failed them, right? Those channels become the channel of last resort. It means that your customers are more frustrated when they do get there, and also the easier questions that they would normally have asked are actually solved by self-service. So what you're left with in the agent-assisted channels are actually the more complex issues that typically companies have a harder time solving through self-service for customers. So digital disruption is actually, oddly enough, making it more important to invest in your agent-assisted experiences, including ones even over more traditional non-digitally channels like voice. The other way that I'm looking at this issue is, I'm going to provide some data behind this. Digital disruption means we expect everything instantly, and we expect, in the way that Scott was saying, that you would compare government to financial services to hotels, we're comparing our service experiences with the consumer apps that we're using that aren't service focused. We expect them to work as seamlessly and effortlessly as our Candy Crush game, our Words with Friends game, our mapping service, whatever it is. And when consumers don't get that, you get these very negative business outcomes. The data up here show that more than half of the people we surveyed would abandon their purchase if they can't find a quick answer. And people's notion of what good service is, how they actually define success in service, has changed. More than 3/4 of them now put valuing their time, that quick, easy, efficient interactions that they're used to from, again, things like games, mapping services, whatever it is. That's how they define excellent customer service, and that's due to this digital disruption we're talking about. And I turn it back to you.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and I could put a bow on this whole thing right there, because that thing that you mentioned about 3/4 of them saying valuing their time is most important, and yet by the time they get to a live agent, their problem is probably more complex. So now what do you do to value their time? And that's where we get to this this combination of really strong search, using context to help the agent get to that answer as quickly as possible, and providing them with the tools where they can make that interaction more personable, more productive, and basically have a better outcome with less effort for them and for the customer. So question 3, and I think I'll let you answer this one first too, Ian. What should be done with employee-facing applications to enable and empower employees?
Well, I'm going to go back to some of the things you were just talking about, Scott. Tools that are predictive, tools that are actionable, but really underlying it is contextual, how would I say, contextual intelligence, some kind of decisioning engine that can do things like surface relevant knowledge to consumers or to contact center agents as they're going through parts of the service resolution task. Sometimes that knowledge is applied to things like choosing the right upsell or cross-sell offer. But all of those things that I've listed here take the context of the interaction, the context of the agent, previous actions already, in what they're trying to do to solve the customer's problem, and also what the customer has done, and then provide some sort of actionable item to the agent. I'm going to dive into one particular piece that I have up here. I have guide to service experience. And what I'm talking about is using knowledge to guide agents. Now, not necessarily in the way that we used to think about heavily scripted guidance. You can do that, the lockdown approach where the agent has no choice. They cannot move to step B unless they have done step A. They cannot move to step C unless they have done step B, right? That sort of lockdown approach, that works for novice agents. That works in compliance type situations, right, where you must do the mini Miranda warning if you're in the collections business, right? There's serious consequences to your business if you skip those steps. But I'm also talking about a different approach to using knowledge. Again, one that uses previous customer actions, that kind of context, and informs what the knowledge is telling the agent to do. But also maybe think of interrogative approaches. Think about where we're going with things like virtual agents. If I tell my virtual assistant, for example, to pay my cable bill next Tuesday, it should know that I left out two pieces of information that are critical to perform that task. From where it should draw the funds and how much to pay. And it should ask me those things, right? You actually it actually mimics the best of what an agent can do, a fully informed agent that actually retained all the information, right? So using the tools to take the part of the agent when the agent is incapable or unwilling to do so, building an interrogative approach. And that's true for both agent-facing tools as well as for consumer-facing tools, as I was hinting at with that sort of virtual assistant approach. So that's what I'm seeing. How about you, Scott?
Well, I find that pretty interesting, that interrogative approach. So we're talking about, at the beginning we said, Ian, that they don't want to retain information. They want search. They want just-in-time. And it's not just about knowledge, to your point. It's also about process. I don't want to have to remember the procedures, the steps, whatever. I'm going to expect the application to tell me every time, step 1, step 2, step 3. And that's an important part of these solutions that we put in front of our employees to empower and enable them. I'll beat this drum all day long, though. It's all about context, context, context. The customer understands and has a lot of that context, and they expect the supplier to use that context to their benefit. I also think it's about navigation, and I won't steal your thunder, but in a couple of slides, Ian, you're going to talk about multiple applications that agents need to deal with. Well, we need to make it easier for them to navigate all of that. We need to push away from the days where they say, hold on, I need to look that up, right? And then you wait and wait while they go try to log into another system. Then there's the cross-channel bit. A good agent providing a high level of contextual experience needs to understand that you may have come in through the journey of web and then live chat and then IVR. And frankly, at this very minute, you're probably still on the website, and you might even still be live chatting with the agent that's down the hall or around the world in another contact center. So we need to provide the ability of the agent to understand what's going on cross-channel. And then next, and this is part of where context comes from, is integrating those systems of record with the systems of engagement. We realize that there is customer information that's helpful in the billing system, in the shipping system, in the web e-commerce system that should be available to the agent if it's agent-provided service, and to the customer in web self-service as well. And so that integration is really, really important. We also don't want to be copying data from the system of record to the system of engagement, but rather just bringing it in as needed in real time. And then finally, and I mentioned this one earlier, about knowledge-infused processes, and that gets to, hey, just tell me in real time what I need to do. Tell me every time, because I'm not going to memorize it. All right, let's move on. We're up to question 4, making good progress. Information and context. What kinds of information and context need to be integrated and unified to provide better outcomes with less effort. So Ian, you go first on this one too.
All right, great. Thanks, Scott. But I actually just wanted to harp on one thing that you talked about, right? And that is that cross-channel experience. You know, we as consumers certainly don't make it easy. I think about when I'm in an airport changing planes and my second flight is delayed or canceled. I have numerous options available to me. I'm an analyst. I fly a lot, so I've got a frequent flyer phone number I can contact. I've got a web app that may or may not have intelligence enough to know that my flight was delayed and give me the opportunity to actually rebook my flight. I have the agents who are in the airport behind kiosks. And so what do I also have social support available to me, right? I can tweet about it. And what do? The answer is yes, I do all of those, right? I'm on the phone trying to get through to an agent. I've already tweeted, and I'm standing in line and checking my mobile app. So trying to understand that context is not a simple task. I just want to point that out, right? But something else you said I think is really important because consumers know all their context. They expect you to know it as well. Often they know more than you do about things like your own product's price and competitive pricing. But they also know things like what device they're using, where they are, when it is. They know what they've done in the past, and that past could be historical past and immediate past. They know what they've said about you on things like social networks, or if in fact they've responded to one of your surveys. So they know what their voice is and the voice of the customer. Now, there's some other information that you should know all these things about customers as well, right? They expect you to know that. But there are some things that you know that they probably don't know, right? What's going on in the current session, what the agent has been doing. And then also, if you're taking Scott's advice and my advice, and you've got this kind of predictive and actionable setup that's telling the agent what to do, what the likely next steps are. So if we're looking at context, I put it into 3 different buckets of what you need to actually know. You need to know situational information, right? Again, what device are they using? Where are they? It could also be things like, what are the interactions, right? So if you're looking at compatibility, if you're a hardware manufacturer, you should know the other setup. We have a big client who does a lot of high-end audio installs, high audio video in people's houses and also in spaces like convention centers. And they need to know what that customer has already installed because they need to know, what they have to integrate into. So situation, then the profile of the customer, and the profile meaning more than what they just told you, but everything that they've done in the past, everything that they tried to do in their service experience before they got to you. And then predictive data is actually part of context because you can use what that likely next step is to predict 3 steps beyond that as well. So think about context in those 3 areas. And just to reinforce what Scott was saying before, when your agent screens look like this, when this is what they're looking at on their desktop, that's not providing that kind of efficient service to the customer because it's going to take them a long time to navigate through. They don't want to remember which screen does what. We talked about the millennial thing, so if there's green screen applications, this is not the type of technology that's intuitive to them, so there's a high, steep learning curve there. So what you're actually looking for is predictive and actionable that will step your agents through the kind of technology. What they're looking at should match what they look at when they go home, when they're leaving on their commute home and they're looking at their phone, when they're at home looking at their tablet. That sort of modern interface is going to smooth the bumps quite a lot. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, I guess, to you, Scott.
Yep, so that's a messy, ugly, convoluted desktop, and this pretty much repeats what you were saying, so I won't stick on it, but the customer has all that context. They know the context. I'm showing on this screen right now a list of some of those other contextual elements that are going to be helpful to providing that service. And what we do with our employee desktop at Verint is we pull together not only what you showed on the last slide, those data elements from all those other systems. Don't even make them go there. Bring those elements to them. Bring it together with this context about the customer. and take all of that, and what we do to provide this smart engagement between the right customer and the right employee is put all that context together with certain rules, processes, and knowledge. Gee, we've talked about that before in this webcast. And pull that together in a way that automates what's happening on the employee desktop for that agent, and that makes for more personalized and productive engagement. So, when you look at integrating and unifying systems, you've got these systems of record at the bottom, CRM and ERP and even the HR system. And then you've got systems of engagement, whether it's self-service or assisted service, and even the employee side of things, the workforce and workforce management, performance management thing. And then the channels at the top. What you need to do is integrate from the bottom, make sure that data is coming to you in real time, and then unify in the top so you don't have that ugly set of mashed up screens and tabs that an agent has to traverse. All right, it is time to turn the corner to the last question. We'll do a little bit of interaction with you in the audience during this question, and then we'll show you the poll results. So, question 5. How can this new reality affect recruiting and training and their impact on performance management? I'm going to take this one first. Here's my perspective on this, that there has to be hiring for attitude, of course. That's your brand. These people are the heartbeat of your brand, but also for aptitude. They need to understand the space that they're in. I was talking with one of our customers recently who's in financial services. And they said, we're hiring young people, and they fit the attitude profile, but we were finding that many of them don't fit the aptitude profile because they don't understand compound interest. They've never had a consumer loan in their life, and yet they're answering calls for their customers who are asking questions about that. So it's got to be the balance there. These are brand ambassadors, so that's the attitude bit of it. And a huge amount of training, by the way. But then evaluate, reward the individual, the team, and the entire group. And we found that the best ways to do that is with gamification and dashboards of metrics that help them understand their performance, but also the performance of their fellow employees. This next one is where I'm going to get you engaged. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk about sampling. What I'd like you to do is to first understand the structured and unstructured data that is at your fingertips. If you're running a call center, if you're doing any kind of customer service, then you have information that has come to you because the customer has said it. They've typed it or they've clicked it, and there's mountains of it, but it's structured and it's unstructured. And so what happens with many organizations is they're just doing sampling. So right now in the audience, if you would click at the bottom of your panel, there's a Q&A box, a Q&A button. If you click that and open it, what I'd like you to do is type into the question field what you think this is a picture of. I'm just showing you a bit of it. So let's see if anyone can figure out what this is a picture of. I'll add another bit of it. Now what do you think it is? Just type your answer into the question box. No guesses yet? We've got a couple guesses coming in. A Greek urn, and some orange peel. Let's see. Any more now? Face, skin, surface of the sun, statue. These are good. I'm giving you two more looks at it, and then we'll reveal. All right. A tunnel. Well, it's the age-old adage of looking at an elephant through a tube, and that's the problem with sampling. When you're only looking at a sample of your data, then you're only, you don't know how many of those samples exist. And when it comes to serving your customers, you not only need to understand individual context of each individual interaction, but also the broader context of what's happening amongst your entire customer base. All right, so speaking of, of sampling, what have you got here, Ian, in that area?
Okay, I'm not sure if my slide is displaying. Make sure everybody can see that. There we go. There we go.
Seeing the ducks.
All right. Yeah, the ducks. So, Scott, I'm going to reiterate what you were talking about the brand ambassadors. One of the things that a lot of our clients are working on is trying to align their recruiting as well as the operational side, the knowledge and service policies, with the brand promise that they make the customers. And I'm not going to dive into this too much because I think you did a very good job of it. But if you're a financial services brand or a healthcare brand that's sort of my health, my wealth type issues, you need agents who are going to project that bedrock trustworthy image. But if you're one of the modern e-commerce sort of fun, cool kid kind of brand, you're not actually looking for that overly serious demeanor. So attitude is incredibly important, but the affect of those agents that they give off really needs to align with your brand. You can support that with all of the knowledge that we talked about. And in fact, it does act as a bedrock layer for consistency there. But you need to be focusing on, what your service needs to reflect about you. The final thing that I actually want to talk about is the importance of the tools that we've been discussing so far on the bottom line of your business. We did a lot of surveying of folks, and here you're seeing a cut of data of one of our surveys focusing on people who work in customer service, and we asked them whether they were satisfied with their tools or not, and then we've correlated that with whether they're happy to work at the company and whether they recommend the company. And you can see it's somewhat intuitive, but the disparity between the two answers is pretty strong. People who are happy with their tools, who feel like you're providing them the tools that enable them to do the task that they've been given to do, in this case serve customers, they're actually happier to work at your company. The people who are happier to work at your company are less likely to leave. I know that sounds obvious, but the tools are actually going to drive lower agent churn. Better tools keep agents happier and keep them in their job longer. And obviously agents with longer tenure actually do learn a little, whether they want to or not. By osmosis, they pick it up.
They might actually retain something.
Yeah. The other thing that our data shows there is that they're actually going to become part of your recruiting engine. Right? They don't just recommend you as a brand. This is an NPS we're asking about here. They're getting other people like them to work at your company, and people tend to hang out with people like themselves. So if they're a good agent, you actually want them recruiting friends and family, because those are also likely to be good agents, good fits with your company. So the tools have an incredible impact that in some ways I think is hidden to most companies. They don't recognize that. They're looking at, whether this will serve customers more quickly, which is clearly important. But you also have to look at one of the other impacts, and that is, how does this affect the operational numbers? And I'm telling you, better tools drive better agent retention and also get agents to recruit other agents who are likely to be good at the job. So that was my last point. And I guess we still have the polling question to do before we do the Q&A. Is that correct, Scott?
We do, yeah. Let me go ahead and see what the poll results show. We'll share them out here. Okay, so the question was, of the following trends, which one presents the biggest challenge for your organization? And this was at the beginning of the webcast. And so number one looks like by far it was higher customer expectations. The world has really changed quickly, and the bar has been raised. Let's see what number two was. Looks like customer self-service, which goes along with this digital disruption, tied with employee scheduling, interestingly, as kind of a tied for second. Mobility, surprising to me, was pretty low.
Yeah, but I understand the employee scheduling. As you move into a multi-channel and omni-channel world, trying to understand the nuances, for example, of chat versus voice and why they're not the same, and why scheduling needs to be treated differently, it is a challenge to many of our clients. I'm not surprised about the higher customer expectations. Many of the attendees may have heard Forrester's Age of the Customer message, where we're saying that customer obsession is essentially the only competitive differentiation left to companies at this point. So, most of our research is predicated on the notion that higher customer expectations is driving the world. And I think a lot of your product development is probably driven that way as well, Scott.
Right. All right. So, as expected, we've gone over just a little bit. I'm pleased for all of you who have stayed with us. We are going to take some Q&A, so if you want to stick around a little bit, Ian and I will answer some questions. If you have a question, you can type it in the Q&A box where you typed your answers earlier to the sampling poll. So go ahead and type a question in there, and I'll ask Tom, do we have some questions already that you want to present to us?
We do, Scott. And this first question is for Ian. Ian, you'd spoken earlier about the benefits of agents using analytics. Does this require a great deal of training?
Not if you're using the process guidance that Scott and I were talking about, right? If you're actually telling the agents what to be doing with that data and what that data means, no, it's not a lot of training for the agents. It is a lot of upfront work for your organization to understand what that data can do and what kind of actions it can drive for agents. The other thing that we didn't really talk about, although Scott hinted at it, is this wealth of data that's out there that's being used for guidance can also be used for continuous improvement of those processes, right? If you're actually pushing a process to an agent and finding that the interaction time is getting longer and longer, you're not actually valuing your customer's time. You now have a lot of sample about how you can go about improving that process, so start digging into it. But on the agent side, it actually doesn't require a lot of training to start building analytical data and context into the workflow of what they do every day.
Interesting, thanks. So, Scott, you and Ian had both spoken earlier about customer context, and we have a question. What are the biggest challenges that companies face in identifying context, and how can this be addressed?
Interesting question. I think that it's not so much a challenge to identify it, but frankly to go get it. If you put yourself in your customer's shoes and you just go home and think about being a consumer for a while, you can easily understand what context might be helpful in making an interaction more efficient and more personalized. I think the challenge is, where is it? Where is the system of record? What kind of APIs are available to get that information in real time? And that's why we've invested, quite heavily in the technology that makes that all easier, so that we can stitch together the context and put it together. We've got plenty of places to put that in the employee desktop. I can tell you that just for routing an interaction to the best agent to serve a particular customer, we allow for and have identified some 150 context clues that might be helpful in doing that. And certainly there's more than that might be indicative for your particular industry. So I'd say it's more about the technical aspects of integrating and unifying than necessarily identifying. You can probably sit down and identify them pretty quickly.
Great, thanks. Well, thank you again to Scott Hayes and Ian Jacobs for sharing their insights with us today. And thank you all for joining us today. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, so any unanswered questions will be addressed by email. This concludes Digital Disruption Demands Action: 5 Questions to Ask in the New Workforce Reality, a one-to-one webinar sponsored by Verint. On behalf of the entire team, thanks for attending and have a great day.